Britain built some of the most iconic bombers of World War II, but not every design was a success. From obsolete failures to legendary war-winning aircraft, here are all 25 major British World War II bombers ranked from worst to best. At number 25 is the Handley Heyford, Britain's last operational biplane heavy bomber. Powered by two Rolls-Royce Kestrel engines and crewed by four, its unusual upper-wing fuselage design already looked outdated before World War II began. Declared obsolete in July 1939, it left frontline service just one day before Britain entered the war. The Heyford never dropped a bomb or fired a shot in combat, spending the rest of its career as a trainer and glider tug. At number 24 is the Armstrong Whitworth Albemarle, a twin-engine aircraft originally designed as a medium bomber. Built with wood and steel to conserve aluminum, it featured Britain's first tricycle landing gear and could carry up to 4,500 pounds of bombs. However, its performance proved inferior to the Wellington already in service, and it flew only 2 recorded bomber missions before being reassigned. The Albemarle later found success as a glider tug and paratroop transport during Sicily, D-Day, and Operation Market Garden. At number 23 is the Handley Hereford, a modified version of the Hampden fitted with Napier Dagger engines instead of the more reliable Bristol Pegasus radials. Although intended to improve performance, the Dagger engines proved noisy, unreliable, and prone to overheating during ground operations. Most Herefords were eventually converted back into standard Hampdens, while the few that reached RAF squadrons served only as training aircraft and never saw combat. At number 22 is the Fairey Battle, a single-engine light bomber that entered service already nearing obsolescence. Crewed by 3 and powered by a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it carried up to 1,500 pounds of bombs but lacked armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. During the Battle of France in 1940, some squadrons suffered losses exceeding 50% on individual missions. Despite its poor combat record, it achieved the RAF's first aerial victory of the war and earned its first 2 Victoria Crosses. At number 21 are the Vickers Vildebeest and Vickers Vincent, 2 biplanes that remained in service long after their prime. Powered by a single Bristol Pegasus radial engine, they could carry either a torpedo or up to 1,100 pounds of bombs, but their top speed of just 143 to 156 mph left them badly outdated by World War II. Even so, they flew determined combat missions against Japanese forces in Malaya and served in campaigns across Iraq and East Africa when few modern replacements were available. At number 20 is the Hawker Hind, a light biplane bomber introduced as an interim replacement while more advanced aircraft were still under development. Powered by a Rolls-Royce Kestrel V engine, it equipped around 20 RAF squadrons before rapidly becoming obsolete by 1937. Most Hinds were reassigned as advanced trainers, but a small number returned to operational service in 1941, flying light bombing missions against Axis forces in secondary theaters across the Middle East and East Africa. At number 19 is the Blackburn Botha, a twin-engine reconnaissance and torpedo bomber that never lived up to expectations. Powered by 2 Bristol Perseus radial engines, it could carry either a 2,000-pound bomb load or a single torpedo, but weak performance and poor rearward visibility made it ineffective in combat. It served with only 1 operational RAF squadron before being withdrawn, while its training career proved equally troubled, with hundreds of aircraft involved in accidents before the type was declared obsolete. At number 18 is the Handley Harrow, a twin-engine heavy bomber that never fulfilled its original purpose. With a crew of 5, a top speed of around 200 mph, and a maximum bomb load of 3,000 pounds, it was already outdated before the war began. The Harrow never flew an operational bombing mission, spending its career as a transport aircraft and later testing experimental aerial mine weapons. It also served in casualty evacuation missions, including the evacuation of wounded troops after the Battle of Arnhem. At number 17 is the Avro Manchester, a twin-engine heavy bomber that showed promise but was held back by its power plants. Crewed by 7 and capable of carrying more than 10,000 pounds of bombs, it was powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Vulture engines that suffered constant reliability problems. Poor performance and frequent engine failures led to its early withdrawal after only 209 were built. However, its redesigned 4-engine successor became the legendary Avro Lancaster, transforming one of Britain's biggest bomber disappointments into its greatest success. At number 16 is the Bristol Bombay, a twin-engine aircraft designed as both a bomber and transport. Powered by two Bristol Pegasus XXII radial engines, it carried a small bomb load of 8 250-pound bombs, limiting its effectiveness as a frontline bomber. During the North African campaign, some crews even supplemented their attacks by pushing additional bombs through the cargo door by hand. Although its bombing role was limited, the Bombay proved valuable as a transport, including the evacuation of the Greek royal family from Crete in 1941. At number 15 is the Vickers Wellesley, a single-engine light bomber that introduced Barnes-Wallis's innovative geodetic airframe construction. Powered by a Bristol Pegasus radial engine, it offered impressive range but carried a relatively modest bomb load compared with newer twin-engine bombers entering service. The Wellesley saw combat mainly against Italian forces in East Africa during 1940 before being withdrawn from frontline operations. Although its wartime career was limited, its geodetic design directly influenced the far more successful Vickers Wellington. At number 14 is the Vickers Warwick, the larger successor to the Wellington and the biggest twin-engine aircraft built by Britain during the war. Using the same geodetic construction, it was intended as a heavy bomber but suffered years of engine development delays that left it obsolete before entering service. Only around 16 were delivered as bombers before the role was abandoned. The Warwick later found greater success as an air-sea rescue aircraft and military transport throughout the remainder of the war. At number 13 is the Handley Hampden, a twin-engine medium bomber nicknamed the Flying Suitcase because of its narrow fuselage. Crewed by four and capable of carrying either 4,000 pounds of bombs or a torpedo, it performed well during the early years of the war but proved highly vulnerable in daylight against modern fighters. Of the 1,432 built, 714 were lost in combat. Despite those losses, the Hampden carried out the RAF's first night raid on Berlin and later took part in the first 1,000 bomber raid on Cologne. At number 12 is the Fairey Albacore, a carrier-based torpedo and dive bomber developed to replace the famous Swordfish. Powered by a Bristol Taurus radial engine and operated by a crew of 3, it offered a more modern design but never matched its predecessor's reputation. The Albacore was less agile and was actually retired before the Swordfish. Even so, it played an important role by damaging the Italian battleship Vittorio Veneto, attacking the Tirpitz, and marking targets during the Second Battle of El Alamein. At number 11 is the Armstrong Whitworth Whitley, a twin-engine medium bomber recognized by its distinctive nose-down cruising attitude. Crewed by 5 and powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, it could carry up to 7,000 pounds of bombs but quickly became outdated as faster bombers entered service. Even so, the Whitley achieved several important firsts, including the RAF's first bombing raids on Germany, Berlin, and Italy. It later transitioned successfully to Coastal Command, where it hunted U-boats using early airborne radar. At number 10 is the short Stirling, Britain's first 4-engine heavy bomber to enter RAF service. Crewed by 7 or 8 and powered by 4 Bristol Hercules radial engines, it could carry up to 14,000 pounds of bombs. However, an Air Ministry wingspan restriction limited its operating ceiling to around 16,000 feet, making it more vulnerable to enemy defenses. Despite this disadvantage, the Stirling flew more than 14,500 operational missions, dropped around 27,000 tons of bombs, and earned a reputation among crews for its excellent handling. At number 9 is the Bristol Beaufort, a twin-engine torpedo bomber developed from the Blenheim. Crewed by 4 and powered by 2 Bristol Taurus radial engines, it could carry either a 2,000-pound bomb load or a 1,605-pound torpedo. Although designed primarily for torpedo attacks, it was more often used as a conventional bomber, and accidents claimed more aircraft than enemy action. Even so, the Beaufort made an important contribution during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, and later provided the foundation for the highly successful Bristol Beaufighter. At number 8 is the Bristol Blenheim, a twin-engine light bomber that was among the fastest aircraft in the world when it entered service in 1937. Crewed by 3 and powered by 2 Bristol Mercury radial engines, it carried up to 1,320 pounds of bombs, but was rapidly outclassed by modern fighters after 1940. Despite becoming increasingly vulnerable, the Blenheim achieved several notable milestones, including the RAF's first U-boat kill and the first successful radar-guided air interception in aviation history. At number 7 is the Bristol Beaufighter, ranked for its torpedo bomber role rather than its famous career as a heavy fighter. Powered by 2 Bristol Hercules radial engines and crewed by 2, the Turbo variant carried torpedoes or rockets for anti-shipping strikes. Introduced in 1943, it became one of the RAF's most effective maritime attack aircraft, particularly in the Mediterranean and Pacific. During the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, Beaufighters famously suppressed Japanese ships with devastating cannon fire while torpedo bombers closed in for their attacks. At number 6 is the Fairey Barracuda, the Royal Navy's first all-metal torpedo and dive bomber. Crewed by 3 and powered by a Rolls-Royce Merlin 32 engine, it could carry either a 1,620-pound torpedo or up to 1,800 pounds of bombs. Early production models suffered from limited power and difficult handling, but later versions proved far more capable. The Barracuda achieved its greatest success during Operation Tungsten in April 1944, when it scored direct hits that disabled the German battleship Tirpitz for months. At number 5 is the Vickers Wellington, one of Britain's most successful and durable bombers of World War II. Crewed by 5 and built around Barnes-Wallis's innovative geodetic airframe, it combined long range with exceptional survivability, often returning home despite severe battle damage. More than 11,400 were built, and the Wellington served on the front line throughout the entire war. It also formed the backbone of the RAF's first 1,000 bomber raid on Cologne, and flew over 47,000 operational missions. At number 4 is the Handley Halifax, a 4-engine heavy bomber that became one of the RAF's principal strategic aircraft. Crewed by 7 and powered by either Rolls-Royce Merlin or Bristol Hercules engines, later versions reached speeds of over 300 mph while carrying up to 13,000 pounds of bombs. Although often overshadowed by the Lancaster, Hercules-powered Halifaxes achieved lower combat loss rates and higher crew survival. The type flew more than 82,000 missions and dropped over 224,000 tons of bombs on Axis targets. At number 3 is the Short Sunderland, a long-range flying boat that became one of the most effective maritime patrol bombers of World War II. Crewed by between 7 and 11 personnel and powered by 4 radial engines, it could remain airborne for up to 14 hours while patrolling vast stretches of ocean. Nicknamed the Flying Porcupine because of its heavy defensive armament, the Sunderland regularly fought off enemy aircraft and helped destroy around 26 to 28 U-boats during the Battle of the Atlantic, making it a vital Allied asset. At number 2 is the Avro Lancaster, Britain's most successful heavy bomber of World War II. Crewed by 7 and powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, it carried the largest bomb load of any British wartime bomber, including the 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bomb. The Lancaster flew more than 156,000 sorties and dropped over 608,000 tons of bombs, accounting for more than half of RAF Bomber Command's total bomb tonnage. It also carried out the famous Dam Busters raid and later helped sink the German battleship Tirpitz. At number 1 is the de Havilland Mosquito, widely regarded as Britain's finest bomber of World War II. Built almost entirely from wood and crewed by just 2, its twin Rolls-Royce Merlin engines gave it a top speed of more than 400 mph, allowing it to rely on speed instead of heavy defensive guns. Carrying up to 4,000 pounds of bombs, the Wooden Wonder completed nearly 40,000 bomber command sorties with the RAF's lowest bomber loss rate, while also conducting precision strikes, V-1 interceptions, and special operations throughout the war.